Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Good evening and welcome to this evening's Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee for the 14th of January 2021. Just some house rules, so please can I remind all participants that this meeting will be recorded and a copy archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, they can please put their hands up. I'll be watching out for you on the camera, or you can use the hand up feature on MS Teams. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or democratic officer know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help the broadband or the Wi-Fi bandwidth. So at least you can hear and be heard. So I welcome all committee members, officers, and registered public speakers. So with that out of the way, we can move on now to the first part of the meeting, which is apologies for absence. Do we have anyone?
Councillor, we've received apologies from Councillor Parker.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, we're waiting for Councillor Kemp to come online because he's having difficulty. Anyone else? Okay, all quiet. Now we'll move on to agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of December 2020. Do we want to go through it by block, or we're happy to move the minutes? I propose we move them. Do we have? We have a seconder, and I'm the proposer. I'm allowed to do that. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Leighton was the seconder. Thank you. And then on to agenda item 3, which is to receive declarations of interest, including whipping declarations. Councillor Hodges, hi there. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I do have a declaration. Agenda item 5, school admission arrangements 2022 to 23. I am an LEA governor for Yscol Barrack, and I have a dispensation to speak and vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hodges. Anyone else have any declaration?
Sorry, can I just say as well, I am reminded my wife is also an LEA governor for Yscol Barrack.
Thank you. And one last thing, Councillor Rowlands mentions he will have to leave the meeting at 5:45. Thank you, everyone. Now we are on to agenda item 4, which is a reference from Cabinet, which was on the 2nd of November 2020, which is to do with the review of statues, monuments, street names and building names.
Chair, before you move on, can I just ask, I got kicked off for a few minutes,
Sure.
so I missed the very beginning of this, so I apologise for that. But have we, as a committee, sent our condolences to Councillor Parker in view of his sad loss earlier this week? Could I ask that we do that at the start of the meeting, please?
No, we haven't, and thank you, Councillor Thomas. We should really do that, and I express my sympathy as well to Councillor Parker, and I'm sure as a committee we'd be happy to send our condolences as a group.
Yeah, and he is a member of our committee, so I think it's appropriate.
That's very true. I agree. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. And now on to agenda item 4. Who will be taking this? The officers.
I'll take this if that's okay, Councillor.
Thank you, Tom.
Good evening, committee. Thanks for having me. As the chairman just said, this is a reference from Cabinet in November to your committee, and it relates to a review of monuments, street names and building names on council-owned land. The report sets out the background, which is the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, which brought to attention the issues of ongoing racism within the world, and that's the reason for bringing the report to your committee, because of the terms of reference and having the equalities aspects within the remit of your committee. The council has got an established strategic equality plan. I brought that to your committee last year, and that sets out the actions that we're undertaking to tackle racism. But I think Black Lives Matter clearly demonstrated that there's a need to do more, and this report sets out the council's contribution to this. So this is the work to ensure that statues, commemorations on public land, as well as the names of streets and buildings, become reviewed and make sure that they're representative of local people's values and those of a modern and inclusive council. Members will be aware that the First Minister announced an audit of public monuments, street and building names across Wales with the history of Black communities as the focus last year, and a task and finish group had been led by Gaynor Legal. That review has concluded at a national level, and the results of the review are going to be reported to the Culture Committee for the First Minister to then consider next steps at a national level. However, we wanted to bring this report to you this evening to show the work that will commence within the Vale of Glamorgan. So the Black Lives Matter movement prompted people to consider the appropriateness of commemoration and acknowledgement of people and events from history and their relevance to today. It's particularly the case where there are links to the intolerable slave trade. But there's also an opportunity here not only to look at history, but also to look to the future and look at positive recognition of people from a diverse range of backgrounds. And at Cabinet, Councillor Johnson made a representation regarding the Welsh language, for example, and Cabinet clearly confirmed that would be an issue that would be considered as part of potentially underrepresented groups, and indeed celebrating the diverse community within the Vale and across Wales. So the proposal is that we would undertake this review, both from an historic perspective, but also inviting consideration for future recognition of individuals and events from our recent history. So it will do both things, and it will be wide-ranging in terms of its diversity. Cabinet were very keen for this to be as participative as possible. So for that reason, we're seeking representations from all town and community councils across the Vale. And we're asking them for their ideas around figures or events which may be the cause for concern, views on how they feel that those concerns could be addressed, and equally, as I say, to invite ideas about people who could potentially be commemorated in the future. The report that you've got on the agenda, Chair, sets out the composition of the panel, and Cabinet have requested a terms of reference be reported to them for approval prior to the panel meeting, and Cabinet are going to consider that terms of reference at a meeting later this month. The report also sets out, importantly, what actions could be progressed, which may include the removal or retention of statues or commemorations. It could potentially include renaming of streets or building names, but it could also require us to look at how we can provide additional information or education. And I think that's representative of the fact that these are complex issues and things that need careful consideration. So the idea is that the panel will consider representations from the public as well as town and community councils, consider them, make recommendations to Cabinet for Cabinet's consideration, and importantly, that your committee will continue to be kept informed as part of that process. So the next steps are that town and community councils have been sent this report. We will send them a further reminder to give them maximum opportunity to make their representations. We'll equally canvass opinion publicly via social media. Cabinet will consider, as I say, the terms of reference later this month, and we'd look to then establish the panel for a first meeting in February. And then there will be an ongoing process of consideration of representations and panel meetings and Cabinet, and obviously committee as well. So the reason for bringing it this evening was that Cabinet wanted to refer it so that the committee were made aware of progress in this area, and to invite any initial observations as well.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Burnett has requested to speak. Hi there.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, when it went to Cabinet, this was the leaders' report, but I agreed to bring this here this evening. I wanted to add a bit of context to it because, as I said at the Cabinet meeting, this is a very complex topic, but it's very, very right that it's addressed at this time because there is a broader aspect to this. In terms, I mean, if people who live in Barry would know that there's been sense of place work going on for the past few years, looking at how people can feel engaged and fully sort of part of their own community. And it's really important that we all feel that way. Much has been made about, oh, this is some plan to get rid. This is some plan to get rid of. Street names and monuments and whatever. For me, I don't know if everybody else is getting announcements. Headphones, but it's a bit disconcerting. So
I'm so sorry. I think Gareth has been trying to help Councillor Kemp get online, and I think he's had to join on his phone. And Teams does announce when people join on their phone, just so we're made aware. So sorry about that.
No, that's all right. It's just you didn't think I was going slightly strange, stopping every now and again. But one thing that I just wanted to sort of bring your attention to as an example. There was some research undertaken a few years ago in terms of Black history in Barry, and it covered, one of the things it covered was a group called the Domino Club that was only in place between 1947 and 1951, but it was the first mixed mixed race youth club in Wales, and it was run by a gentleman called Abi Farah. Now, that is commemorated on the Thompson Street Bridge with dominoes on there, but how many people know that that is relevant? But more than that, how many people know that Abdul Rahim Abi Farah is his son, and he was brought up and educated in Barry and ended up being involved in the negotiations that freed Nelson Mandela. Now, for my mind, this is just as much about us needing to recognise people who have made such a huge contribution in our communities, because rather than saying to people, you live in a street that's got a suspect name, and sometimes we don't know what the origin of the name was, what it does do is it says, if you live in the Vale, look at what you can achieve. Look at what people from the Vale have achieved, and look at how this all fits together. You know, you've got a home to be proud of, and it actually also says to every single person in our communities, you are welcome, you are valued, and you are part of our communities. So this is a much more positive piece of work than some would have it believe. And I really, really am looking forward to it. I mean, I've been to a couple of exhibitions, and Nick would know this very well, by an amazing group called Barry Island Historical Group. And the amazing information that they have got, particularly on Barry Island, but also on Barry as a whole, that shouldn't be filed away in boxes. We should know about that sort of information. So I really, really am looking forward to this, so that we can do that sort of sense of place work right across the Vale, and have an identity that everybody can buy into.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. We have Councillor Norman asking to speak next. Hi there.
Hi, thanks for that, Liz. It's very, very enlightening. And as I say, whilst I wholeheartedly agree with this, and I think we need to know more about what's going on in our area and who we know to celebrate, I think we also have to be very careful that we don't go off with a knee-jerk reaction to these things, because very often the name that could be misinterpreted actually has a different root or different history altogether, and this has to be researched before anything is done. And secondly, a lot of these names, if the street name is changed or the road name is changed, who is going to bear the cost to the residents of renaming all their bank details, national insurance details. Businesses, there could be things like brochures or their advertising literature. All this is extra cost, which I think also needs to be taken into consideration if they do decide to rename streets. As I say, I wholly support what you're doing, and I think for future reference, this must be taken into consideration. But please be aware that a lot of expense could be incurred by residents if we decide to go off ad hoc changing street names. I think you're going to intend to, but there could be one or two which people find offensive, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. But please be careful that this is not a knee-jerk reaction to pressure from outside, which I must admit we have had quite a lot of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. So we have two more people lining up, Councillor Perks and then Councillor Rowlands. Councillor Perks.
Thank you. Thank you. Just going off what Councillor Liz Burnett had to say about us recognising, you know, sort of the people who have come through the Vale of Glamorgan and gone on to do extraordinary things. I think there's also the ordinary people who've helped to build Barry and to build, you know, the docks were built. It was a multicultural area. We need to recognise how influenced, you know, sort of Barry and the Vale is by the docks that we have, you know, we had and still have, you know, and the different people that have lived here. And I think using this as a positive force to recognise the people who have contributed to the Vale and go on to contribute to the Vale, and using, you know, yes, different street names will perhaps have to be renamed, and different buildings and different statues, you know, to consider those, whether they're appropriate for this day and age, need to be taken into consideration. But yes, it's also a positive thing that where we recognise the people who've, you know, lived through the Vale and contributed so magnificently. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perks, and now Councillor Rowlands. Hi there.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to say, as someone who studied history at university, you know, I have a great sense of sort of what the history of the country is, and my deepest concern is if we start going down, like Councillor Norman said, start going down changing street names. Surely we should be learning from our history rather than trying to erase it. I agree. When I was mayor, we held an event for Black History Month in the library to recognise the great people that have sort of unique in the Vale of Glamorgan. And I know Nick does the Victorian tours, which are interesting, and he emphasised, you know, on Barry and stuff like that. But as Councillor Norman said, you know, changing street names and street buildings, you know, like Glaston Park or Glaston School, if you're thinking of, you know, if it's linked, you know, Glaston, who was a Prime Minister, you're starting to go down a slippery slope. I think we should, what I agree with is, you know, showing people that the history behind these people and learning from it rather than starting to erase. And that's my concern. And also, who's going to, if we are going to change street names, who's going to be paying for it? The taxpayer and businesses. So that's what I agree with mostly what Councillor Norman was saying. And also, should we be doing this during a pandemic as well? Because I think the general public will be thinking of us to, you know, be concentrating on that.
Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. I hope everyone can still hear me. Councillor Rowlands, so in terms of this agenda item, is there anything you would like to propose or anything, or should we keep that to later?
I've got my hand up, Chair.
Neil, sorry.
I'm happy to hear what Neil, and I think Nick has raised his hand as well, to hear what they...
Okay, Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I don't think it's a question of erasing the past. I think it's a question of recognising and contextualising the past. And the most famous case in the country at the moment is Colston Hall and Colston's thing over in Bristol, where a very rich philanthropist as such built the Colston Hall, put up his own statue, paid for, and all the rest of it, and put a vast amount of money into Bristol. Having looked back on it now and viewing it from the point of view of the 21st century, it's recognised that most of that money came from blood. It came from the deaths and destruction of communities in West Africa, and killings and the slavery and the appalling trade that was going on then, and that was for many years not recognised within Bristol. It was people were proud of Colston, people were proud of Colston Hall, and were unaware of that history. And I think it's a matter of, it is important, as Councillor Rowland says, not to erase the past, but to recognise and contextualise that. And yes, there may well be certain individuals who are now figures of shame due to things like the stuff that Colston did. I'm not suggesting that particularly applies in Barry, but if it is discovered that applies in Barry, then steps need to be taken. And yes, if there is a cost, that needs to be considered. I wouldn't want to distract from the impact of the Black Lives Movement matter and the importance of and the implications for our black and minority ethnic neighbours. But I would like to just, as an aside, remind the committee that there are other members of the community who are equally neglected or ignored, particularly women, for example. Of all the statues in the UK, apart from royal statues, any historical statue, women represent 2.7% of those statues. I mean, you're talking over 50% of the population now represented by less than 2.7%. Maybe that needs to figure into thinking at some point in the future. And certainly at the moment, I think the contextualised audit of what we have in terms of the historical past, and the contribution of what is in fact one of the oldest immigrant populations in the UK, in Cardiff and Barry, needs to be put into context. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Norman, I think your hand's up. I don't know if Councillor Hodges wants to come in as well. I don't know whether he's got his hand in from Councillor Hodges. I'll go first.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Interesting debate. The first thing I'm always reminded of with history is that the victors write the history, which is why we sometimes have to rediscover it for ourselves. When it comes to statues, there's actually a great paucity of them in the Vale. There's only one actually on the streets of Barry, and that's certainly one that's important and a good one, if you know what I mean, with David Davis. Barry's got especially a very multicultural history, which, as Liz said, with the Domino Club, that's certainly one example. There's plenty of other stories about our multicultural history, both good and not so good. But one thing I want to perhaps be positive with is that when it comes to naming of streets in the future, new street names, one of the issues I think we had in the past and the near past is that there was a great lack of imagination with naming of some streets. There used to be like a wholesale naming of an area, say a new estate, where, well, let's just call them after trees, let's just call them after mountains, let's just call them after explorers, for example, things like that, rather than giving them actually locally based, important, historical, interesting names based on the locality that they now are in. So I think we need to be positive about this. Looking through the list that came from Welsh Government, we don't have that many issues, I suspect, within the Vale, because Barry is largely new and past the slave times. Penarth just about the same. There's not that much out there that causes us concern. But I think we need to be positive for the future. And I think we, perhaps as a learning and culture committee, need to push the need not only for education of the local history, but to actually push that we actually do showcase our local history in some way within the Vale. And what better place to have something like that than Barry? So there we go. I'll leave it at that, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hodges, and now Councillor Norman. You're on mute, Councillor Norman. And then Councillor Birch
Sorry,
afterwards.
sorry.
That's okay.
We've talked about the historic roots of names. We just one that came to mind then we were talking about Colston in Bristol, where we actually have an estate agent in Lantford called Mr. Colston, and I'm sure he's not a slave trader or ever has been. So if somebody named a street after him, then it could be seen by some people as offensive. We have a Picton court in Lantford Major, nothing to do with General Picton. It was the builder chap who built it. So this have to be researched before we go, have a knee-jerk reaction and start altering street names, etc.
Thank you, and Councillor Birch.
Thank you. It's been interesting listening to other people's contributions. I mean, we've already discussed this at Penarth Town Council. And although Penarth has, as Nick says, got very little to do with the slave trade, an awful lot of its history is tied up with battles, which some people might disapprove of, and our colonial past. For example, the streets and so forth named after Clive and Windsor, which was another colonial family with an awful lot of money. So I think that we need to be careful in treading this political line of what we think is going to be offensive and what is not going to be offensive. And as a teacher, my how can I put this? My inclination is to say that we need to be informing and educating people. And what we recommended when we were asked about this was to look at information plaques, QR codes, so that we are not erasing history, we're not rewriting it. We are informing people about what came before. I mean, one of the interesting things about watching what's going on in America at the moment is the way that it's commonplace for them to name check and refer to previous presidents, previous events that have taken place. I mean, they have a much shorter history than we do, so it's probably a lot easier. But, they're able to do that with some familiarity. And I would like to think that, we are able to inform and educate the general public living in these streets of what has led to the naming of those streets and how we can refer it to and contextualise it with our current history about where they're living now and what difference that might make. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Birch. Does anyone else have any questions before I ask one or two questions? Councillor Kemp, I know you're on the phone. If you want to say anything, just shout. But just a quick one then. So I'm I was a bit surprised. So how does street names and things get? Obviously, there's a process currently about new ones. Can't some of this review group stuff methodology go through that? Or is there something you can do to bolster that as opposed to doing a separate review group?
I can certainly take that to an extent, Councillor. The
Sure.
policy.
I'm missing Tom.
Tom, you've frozen. And your audio's gone as well.
Yeah.
No, Tom, we can't hear you. I'll send a message in the chat.
Allocated and worked, and
Hi,
that
Tom.
could clearly pick.
You'll
Hi.
have to start from the start. I'm sorry, you cut out. You'll have to answer your question again.
My apologies. I was saying just to myself rather than to the committee, my apologies, that there is a street naming process. So certainly any ideas for future commemoration or recognition of people could potentially feed into that process. I think the important part is to recognise that this is a review of things wider than just street names, and therefore actually taking it holistically from both that historic and future perspective as part of a task and finish approach is the rationale for that.
Thank you, Tom. I missed some of it. Sorry, I got bad network connectivity. I've just taken my webcam. Councillor Rowlands, I see you got your hand up again.
Just briefly, Chair, because I will need to leave soon. I just wanted to make the point that I don't think we should be spending too much time on this. We're in a pandemic. I know Tom, will be disappointed me saying that. And I think the cabinet should be probably do a bit more work around it before before a panel and looking into. I think it needs to be deferred for later on in the year rather than immediately now. Maybe Councillor Burnett could give some light on roughly the timeline when they were thinking of doing it. I don't know.
Councillor Burnett.
I think if Councillor Rowland would like to go back through the actual report, it does give timelines within it. In fact, when this was first looked at, it was at the start of the pandemic, and that's why it has taken a little bit longer than we would have liked to have got this up and running. I think the main time that will be taken is to consult town and community councils, because at the end of the day, this has got to be driven and informed by the views of those. I was really pleased to hear Councillor Birch say that Penarth Town Council has already discussed it and come to some constructive conclusions. So, the team that are taking this forward are obviously very busy with coronavirus related things as well. But as an awful lot of our officers, etc., doing and cabinet are multitasking at the moment. So we will take it forward flexibly alongside the timescales that are laid out. I think there are a lot of people around that would like to see some progress on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Councillor Rowlands, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay. So just to reiterate, Councillor Rowlands, my major concern really is whether if we did this during the pandemic, would it have enough exposure? And it's obviously very emotive. And whether we do just refer it until maybe this time next year when we have the vaccine, a large population, whether we do it that way. Councillor Perks, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you for that. No, I don't think we do defer this. I think it's already it's in people's minds already. So from the summer of 2020, we try and move things along in the timescale that's been suggested. We try and connect with the town and community councils to get them involved, and we move along as best we can alongside the pandemic. Not all work has to stop. Yes, the pandemic is so obviously something that's affecting us all, but I think we also need to look at sort of different items that come before us as well. We can't just put things off because we have got a pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Perks. Does anyone else would like to speak or anything? Okay, let's see about wrapping this up then. We've had a lot of debate and some positives, some concerns. Does anyone want to bring anything forward before we look at the recommendations, motions or so forth?
I'd like to move the recommendations, please. That's Rhiannon.
I'd like to second the recommendations. That's Sandra Perks.
Okay, does anyone from this group want to bring anything forward? If not...
No, just that my concerns are noted, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. So we're happy to approve this. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, thank you everyone. That was a good debate. Thank you very much. And then now we move on to agenda item 5, which is school admissions arrangement 2022 and 23.
Good evening. This report was referred from Cabinet as part of the consultation process for the school admission arrangements proposed for 22-23. The consultation period is ending on the 8th of February. The proposed changes contained in the consultation relate to the establishment of a temporary dual catchment area for St Sires for the 3 academic years from 22-23 to alleviate short-term pressure for secondary school places in Barry, and also a proposed change to the Roos area catchment for Ysgol Dewi Sant to Ysgol Sant Barrack. This would ensure a more even distribution of school places. The consultation, as I said, is due to be completed on the 8th of February. We've had a good response. 70% of the respondents are so far in favour of the proposed changes, primarily as a result of the parents specifying that they like the idea of having more opportunities, particularly for children who have children who reside in Barry and have been attending schools that were traditional feeders for St Sires in the past. There are also some concerns that have been raised by Pencoitra in relation to the potential for children moving out of the Barry area. That's in relation to the proposed changes for secondary. There's been very little feedback so far on the issue of the changes to Welsh medium, although they're primarily positive, the ones that have been referred. As I said, these changes for the secondary catchment areas were proposed as a result of a temporary concern over numbers running from 22-23 to around about 25, and you can find details of that in the review documentation in Appendix B on page 4. That's a brief summary, but obviously I'd be happy to take any questions if appropriate.
Thank you, Lisa. Would anyone like to start us off with asking a question or observation? All silence. I see Nick saying no. Okay, great. Let me have a look. So, are we happy to endorse this report? Do we have a nominator? Councillor Hodges and Councillor Jarvie. I'm going to put this.
Yep, happy to move. Yeah.
Proposer and seconder. Thank you very much. Okay, great. And now we can go on to agenda item 6, which is the annual corporate safeguarding report 2019 to 2020. Cabinet reference from the 30th of November last year. Who shall be picking this up?
I think it should be David. Is he still online with us?
Yeah, there he is.
Yeah, it's Jason it is actually. Apologies. Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, this report has been referred by Cabinet for the work being carried to improve the corporate arrangement for safeguarding and protecting children and adults at risk, and so as to allow the Scrutiny Committee to provide you with an update. I hope you've had sufficient time to read the document, as such. I'll outline the main highlights and changes made for this current year report in respect of the Learning and Skills Directorate. Obviously, first of all, during the initial COVID-19 lockdown period, the Learning and Skills Directorate, in conjunction with schools, in line with Welsh Government guidance, maintained a comprehensive check-in tracker for all vulnerable children in schools. This ensured all additional support that was identified was provided and children were kept safe. In fact, this approach was identified as an exemplar by Welsh Government. As a directorate management team, we routinely monitor operational safeguarding practice across the directorate, including during a standing safeguarding agenda item at our monthly DMT meetings. This has particular focus on safer recruitment, safeguarding training, and allegations against employees and volunteers. The annual safeguarding training is delivered consistently across the directorate to standards set by Cardiff and the Vale Regional Safeguarding Board. During the summer of 2020, all safeguarding training packages were reviewed. This included level 1 training for all schools and directorate staff, level 2 training for all designated safeguarding persons and their deputies, and also governor training for safeguarding governors and chairs of governors. And at this moment, an IDEV package is being developed, which will be launched towards the end of this month for all level 1 staff across the directorate and within schools. Training is currently being delivered online by the safeguarding officer myself, with between 8 to 12 sessions being delivered each term. Compliance training compliance rates vary month on month. At the time of completion of this report, the average compliance rate for school-based designated safeguarding persons was 95%, and their deputies 89%, and for designated safeguarding person within the directorate, of the 25, 16 have been trained, and the other 9 are all booked onto courses for training. So the as I said, all the schools in the Vale will have revised and recently developed the model safeguarding policy provided by the directorate, and that this is consistent with Welsh Government guidance. And again, this will be launched in January 2021, as recently supported by the revised Keeping Learners Safe policies, Welsh guidance. As a director, we continue to demonstrate regulatory compliance in relation to licensing children in employment and entertainment, including the licensing of chaperones. The inclusion manager and a dedicated administrative officer are liaising closely with colleagues in Cardiff to ensure greater parity of approach for this area and have revised processes accordingly. And due to COVID, there's been a significant drop in licensing and chaperone requests as local employers for seasonal work and delivery rounds, along with theatres and film companies, have not carried out any work. Safer recruitment figures within the directorate and schools are extremely encouraging, with a compliance rate averaging between 90 and 100% throughout 2020. There's a good level of engagement from the directorate, regional safeguard board committees and subgroups involved with ongoing projects and reviews. Again, the safeguarding officer is heavily engaged in the MAROC domestic violence process, with a recently changed twice weekly daily discussion meetings, along with the fortnightly MAROC meeting and the compliance with the Operation Compass. Again, the director continues to prioritise the management of allegations of abuse against teachers and other member staff and volunteers in accordance with Section 5 of the Social Service and Wellbeing Act. Sorry, Section 5 of the Wales Safeguarding Procedure. I do apologise. Ensuring the safety and welfare of both the children and staff. And during the period in question, there were 7 allegations made against teachers and staff, and all were concluded and substantiated. Thank you, Chair. This is my summary of the key points relating to the work of learning and skills in this field, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jason. Does anyone want to ask any questions, observations, viewpoints? I don't see anything in the chat, and I don't see anyone other than Councillor Thomas. How are you there?
Yeah, sorry about this. Just a brief one, though. On pages 14 or 15 of the report, where they talk about DSPs and school and DDSPs, there's some indication that there's some schools don't either have one or the other are not compliant. Are there any schools where neither are compliant, and there are gaps, or is that? No,
I can assure you that all schools have had the compliance from either DSP or from the deputy that they were within compliance. There's no schools where neither role is not in compliance. No.
Okay, thank you. That was all I wanted to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Anyone else? Councillor David. Hi, David. I just changed your job title. Hi.
Thanks, Councillor Griffiths. It was just to say, really, I hadn't introduced Jason, so just to say that Jason is our new safeguarding officer who started with us in the summer. So he's been with us a fairly short amount of time, but through a very difficult time as well. So I just wanted to, thank him. He's taken up the reins, as I say, in a time which nobody could have foreseen, and I just wanted to thank him for the work that he's doing.
Thank you, David. Okay, if that is all, then are we happy to note? Proposer?
Yeah, I'll do that. Neil.
Councillor Thomas and Councillor Hodges. Thank you very much, Jason and David. With that, we can move now on to the section relating to reports from the Director of Learning and Skills, which is agenda item 7, impact of work in the Central South Consortium's business plan on the region and the Vale of Glamorgan Local Authority.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm presenting the paper here tonight, so thank you for the opportunity to do so. I'll take you through the main points in the report, but I'd like to emphasise as well that we're also joined today by Clara Seary, the Managing Director of Central South Consortium, and Andrew Williams, an Assistant Director of the Consortium, and all three of us are happy to answer questions at the end of this paper as well. This is obviously Central South Consortium's annual report, and it outlines the work of the consortium over the last academic year and the impact it's had on schools in the Vale. Obviously, due to the challenges last year, particularly in relation to COVID, there are differences in what we usually report in terms of this paper. But we have continued to work closely with Vale schools, and this report includes information obviously pre-COVID, but also how CSE adapted its supports to schools during lockdown and to support as well schools during the reopening back in June and July. So I'll take you through the report. I'm conscious you've already seen the paper, so I'm not going to spend too much time on anything, but then we'll have time at the end for any questions. If we begin in terms of on page 2, for example, bullet point 3, we've got there a reference to begin with to Central South Consortium's business plan. You've got the priorities outlined there in point 3. They align very closely, well, the 4 of them relate to the priorities of the national mission. And following that, you've got the progress headlines in relation to each of those priorities. So that will take you through to page 7. I will like to draw your attention, if you don't mind, to point 11 in the report. There's reference there to the role of challenge advisor and the way that that has evolved over the last few months, particularly in light of the COVID situation and the fact that categorization was suspended due to the COVID, and the role has evolved. And part of that involvement has included a change of title. So whereas previously schools had challenge advisors linked to each school in the Vale, they are now called improvement partners. And the emphasis is very much, yes, on improvement, but on partnership work in terms of the partner element, working alongside schools and the local authority together. In terms of the role of the improvement partner and further information about that role, there's further information in Appendix 1 at the back of the report.
In terms of bullet point 10 onwards, there's a reference to comparative data. We usually have quite a comprehensive report about data and comparisons with national figures and previous performance. But obviously, due to COVID, we have got less information here, and what's been included is a statement from the Minister regarding examinations, because I know you're very much aware that the examinations were cancelled and instead we had centre assessed grades, but there is a statement there explaining quite clearly that performance measures were suspended for last academic year as well as this academic year. And if we turn over to page 8, in terms of the second paragraph in page 8, you will see there as well quite clearly the Minister explaining that qualification awards data will not be used to report on attainment outcomes at a school, local authority or regional consortium levels, and must not be used to hold schools to account for their learners' outcomes. So that's the reason why we haven't included any data here, obviously because of the suspension, but also due to that statement there from the Minister. Moving on, there's information provided in bullet point 14 onwards about the challenge and support provided to schools in the Vale. In terms of bullet point 14 onwards, there's reference to begin with to Estyn. Now, we did have an update on Estyn in the scrutiny meeting in November, but there's just a brief overview here in terms of the 4 schools that was inspected last academic year before Estyn suspended their inspections, obviously due to COVID. And there's reference as well in this bullet point to schools that remain in Estyn follow-up category. We have got 3 schools in the Vale that are in Estyn review and they haven't had a follow-up visit. They are Llangan, St Illtyds and Ydaith. Estyn have informed the local authority and the consortium that we will be reviewing progress in those schools, hopefully during the spring term. So that's something hopefully I can report to you in the future. In terms of bullet point 15, there's a reference to the categorisation process. And back in the annual report last January, you were provided with a list of categorisation outcomes for last academic year, as well as the previous academic year. Just to draw your attention, in terms of 2019-20, there was 1 school requiring red level of support, 4 schools requiring amber level of support, 31 requiring green level support, and 20 requiring yellow level of support. In terms of the 1 red school, that was as a result of a recategorisation during the academic year. In terms of the level of support for Halton Primary was changed. They changed back in May from being a B yellow to a D red school following a receipt of a formal warning notice from the local authority. So CSE are working closely with the school and with local authority in terms of ensuring appropriate support in the first instance, and also in terms of monitoring the impact of that report and support. And we have half-termly progress meetings with the school and with the local authority to monitor the progress of the school carefully. In terms of other support from Central South Consortium, in terms of bullet point 17 onwards, there's reference to support that's been provided from schools in the local authority to other schools in the local authority, as well as a number of schools that have accessed the support that's been provided by Central South Consortium. There's also in 17B a reference to the work of schools and their engagement with other schools across the region in school improvement groups. There's also in this point as well a reference to work that's been undertaken in terms of leadership provision, in terms of the new and acting head teacher, aspiring head teacher, and NPQH, National Qualification for Head Teachers, and then reference as well to the work in relation to teaching assistants. In terms of 17F, there's a reference to the bespoke package of all schools that were in receipt last year in terms of red level of support and amber level of support. So with each of those schools, there would have been a package of support that would have been brokered for each school relevant to their needs, and we would have monitored again the progress of that very carefully in terms of red with Halton on a half-termly basis, and then in terms of the amber on a termly basis. In terms of point 18, there's a reference there to the development of the curriculum for Wales. What I would like to emphasise is, you know, sort of elements of that work was paused by Welsh Government during the first lockdown, but in terms of CSE, CSE continued to provide professional development, professional learning opportunities if schools were in a position to and able to partake. So we did provide information for schools and also for governors on the curriculum for Wales. We then move on to a section in terms of the work of the consortium during national lockdown. And what you've got here is information about the role of the improvement partner and principal improvement partner. And in terms of that work, there is more detailed information in relation to supporting distance learning, into supporting then as the schools move towards a more blended learning of distance learning, work to support the professional learning of all staff in schools, and then supporting as well with the repurposing of schools. We have included in the report 2 case studies just to give a flavour of the work of the improvement partner. So in point 21, for example, the example we've got here is the work of Ysgol Penygarth and how the consortium supported their work specifically to improve provision in terms of distance learning and the confidence of staff in terms of delivering online activities. There was a lot of discussion between the improvement partner and the head teacher and members of the SLT, and because of that, it became apparent that there was some variability in provision within year groups and across year groups as well. So the improvement partner in this case brokered support in from the digital team in the consortium, and there's been quite an extensive training programme, an ongoing training programme for staff at the school in order for them to gain their confidence and to develop their skills. In terms of the impact there, we have been able to report and pleased to report that this has resulted in improved digital skills of staff, and staff now have a sound understanding of features such as Google to support assessment for learning, feedback and collaboration. There's more consistency developing in practice within year groups and across key stages. And there's actually now more sharing of effective practice by staff. I would like just to say this is just one example of a case study, but it's just a flavour in terms of to show how an improvement partner worked with the school in order to have, you know, so to support the school during lockdown. There's another example on point 22, and that just outlines the engagement of the improvement partner with the school. Obviously, our nature of the engagement changed significantly during the year, and it just shows you, the improvement partners responded to the needs. There was a strong focus on head teachers' well-being, in particular, and staff's well-being. But there's some figures there that shows you, in a sense, that there was a significant number of contact with individual schools, and that the interaction was high and regular with all schools during the lockdown period. Again, referring to the lockdown period, in terms of point 23 onwards, there's reference to a report on distance learning that was undertaken in the summer term back in June. And this report focuses on 5 key questions. But again, it gives you a summary feel in terms of the work that's been undertaken in terms of the schools in the Vale, in terms of how they knew that learners were fit and healthy in the first instance. There's figures there in terms of engagement with distance learning. But again, I would like to emphasize this is last summer. So I'm just saying that because things have improved considerably, and there's a very different picture in schools at the moment. But you've got information there in terms of the distance learning engagement. And later on in the report, you'll see that there's some information about which learners are engaging and what are the challenges that some of those learners are facing. And then there's information about the barriers and challenges that schools were facing. And you can see that actually they're quite wide-ranging there. And finally, in terms of this report on distance learning, there's a section there in terms of what works well for you and why. So again, there's a comprehensive list there of ideas and things that have worked particularly successful in schools in the Vale. Point 24 onwards makes a reference to the work and support that improvement partners gave in terms of the reopening back in June and July. So there's reference there to the work in terms of the improvement partner and the principal improvement partner. And finally, I'd just like to draw your attention to the funding, the additional funding that's been given to the local authority via the local authority annex. And in terms of the Vale, that's been used to support professional learning for head teachers and leaders and other relevant staff in developing an understanding of attachment awareness and trauma-informed interventions. This has actually been quite timely because this has been a key importance actually in terms of the lockdown period, and it has greatly improved skills and understanding of key members of staff in terms of trauma-informed practices in our schools. But there's been a 2-day training for all members, for member of a senior leadership team in all schools in the Vale, and that was held during the autumn term and spring term. So I'm sorry it's a whistle-stop tour of the report, but I know you've seen it previously. I just wanted to highlight some of the key findings in the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thomas, I believe you've indicated you would like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Caris. That was a very comprehensive report and a really, really good whistle stop of the points. You mentioned the distance learning and the difficulties that some people experience. The report was authored 2 months ago. There is a reference in the report to an apparent decrease in the engagement with distance learning up to that time. That's from page 18 onwards, with some suggestions as to what works and what the barriers are, as you mentioned. 2 months on, can you give us any insight on the direction of travel of this problem and the introduction of remediation processes to support distance learners? And the other point I wanted to make really is about way forward and going forward. And I understand that the national hope is for the COVID to be defeated and the vaccination programme to achieve this. But in fact, the narrative has shifted in recent days with the public health guy, the guy in charge of Public Health Wales, talking about how it is now endemic, and the vaccination will help suppress it, but it ain't going to go away. We've seen the new variants, the Danish variant, the Essex or Boris variant, the South African variant, and today they're talking about a new Brazilian variant, all of which are seen as more problematic than the original. COVID, as I say, is no pandemic. It's part of the landscape. Hopefully it can be suppressed, but to talk about post-COVID or after COVID is missing the point. It's not going to happen. We need to gear our forward thinking into coping with COVID. In the same way as we live with flu, which is less nasty and arrested, but we have injections yearly, and with the common cold, all of which are coronaviruses, we are going to be living with COVID for quite some time. And we really need to tailor our thinking and our operation to coping with that, and not to some imagined world where it ain't going to exist anymore, because that's not happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I got a hand up here from Mr. Gapper. Hi, Hugh.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just very quickly, and it relates to the points raised by Councillor Thomas. I'm aware, as somebody who speaks to parents and teachers of Welsh medium schools, that there's been a real problem of late, or over the last few months, whereby children from non-Welsh speaking families who are in Welsh speaking schools are really losing their skills in Welsh and losing their confidence to use Welsh. And this, I understand, is really affecting their ability to learn, via the computers, online, and their willingness to engage with that type of learning. I don't think it's a small problem. I think it's a very significant problem, especially when you consider that most of the kids in our Welsh medium schools come from non-Welsh speaking families. So it's really inhibiting learning for them, I think. And I just wondered if Caris could tell us how this has been addressed and what efforts have been made to support those children and those families in particular. Thank you.
Chair,
Yeah.
are you happy for me to respond?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Diolch yn fawr, Hugh, for your question. It's a very relevant and pertinent question. And it's certainly something that's been Welsh Government are very aware of the situation, and it's something as a consortium we're very much aware of that situation as well, and we share the concerns that you've raised in terms of pupils who attend Welsh medium schools who come from English speaking homes. In terms of what's been done, there's been a considerable amount of work undertaken by Welsh Government and regional consortia and Estyn, going back actually to just before Easter, to develop resources to support pupils and schools and parents in relation to this work. So there's been a lot of additional resources available on Hub to promote and to support pupils to develop their skills, particularly, as you mentioned, in oracy. There's been, for an example, one set of resource that's encouraging pupils to use a tool called Flipgrid, where they can record and share and listen to their feedback, and contribute, so that they actually are listening and speaking and listening in terms of some of the work that they're undertaking. There's also been a significant amount of work to promote the informal use of Welsh. Because obviously that's very important as well, and for pupils, to hear Welsh in different contexts during this period. So there's been a lot of emphasis on Siarter Iaith, the Welsh Language Charter, and the emphasis of encouraging pupils to enjoy using the Welsh language. Certainly this work is actually still continuing. There's other elements that was completed as well in terms of resources, for example. When resources were created by regional consortia and Welsh Government, they were uploaded to Hub. And we ensured as part of that work that there was bilingual guidance to support parents at home with each of those resources, so that they could, sort of parents could have an understanding in terms of what was being asked of pupils. And there were things like prompt questions to ensure discussions. Even it didn't matter which language that happened, but it was, that pupils were able to discuss their work with their parents. So it's very much on our radar. We've also now got Welsh and education officers working closely with Welsh medium schools to ensure that the right support is available for schools now, sort of when pupils are back in the autumn term, but also ongoing now. And, sort of we're very much working closely with schools to ensure that, to monitor the impact of that work.
Thank you, Caris. Councillor Thomas, I believe you asked a question earlier. I don't know whether, Caris, did you answer it? Are you okay, Neil?
Yeah, no. It was. Yeah, I don't think Caris did answer it. Actually, it was about the direction of travel of the problem and the introduction of remediation processes to support the distance learners generally. I mean, I take Hugh Gapper's point about the specific difficulties in Welsh medium school, but we're talking. I was talking across the piece, the whole of the Vales education programme, where, as I say, the indication within the report is that was going backwards up to 2 months ago, but new ideas were coming in. I was hoping to hear that that's actually having some effect and things are improving.
Chair, are you happy for me to comment in relation to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes,
right.
Yes, please.
Thank you,
Great.
Councillor Thomas, and sorry for not replying first time around. In terms of distance learning, there's been considerable progress made in schools in relation to distance learning. There's been a lot of lessons learned in terms of the provision sort of from the initial lockdown, and a reflection on sort of provision. There's been a lot of consultation with parents and with pupils in terms of what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. And with things like the barriers, there's been a lot of discussion and support for schools to how they can move forwards in terms of addressing some of those issues. When we had the secondary schools, if you recall, a week after half term, there was a fire break, and the provision there, when we monitored the provision and we could see the provision, then there was a significant improvement in provision and engagement in our secondary schools. We've got schools that have developed things like engagement trackers, so they're now able to pinpoint with more clarity and with more information in terms of figures about the engagement of pupils. And that information now is being shared, for example, with parents. So there's more engagements developing in a number of schools in terms of, with parents and also with pupils. What we are finding as well, in terms of obviously the very short term, that's the time the schools have been on lockdown at the moment, that there is also more schools now are trialling and developing new strategies. We've got lots of schools now offering live provision for schools in terms of catch up on elements, and also sort of to reinforce and to provide lessons and learning opportunities. So there is significant improvement, certainly in terms of provision. We are aware still of some barriers in terms of equipment, and where that is the case, we as Consortium are working closely with schools and with the local authority to ensure that we've got the right equipment for pupils and their families.
Okay, thank you, Caris. Is that
Can
okay?
I add to that, Chair? Sorry.
Sure.
I think it is looking at how do we move forward with this, because I think you're right. We are going to be living with COVID for a significant period of time, and whether that's everybody in school, everybody out, periods of isolation, we're not really sure how that's going to go. But the work that we're doing with schools this term is very much pushing this back into how do we know that our children and young people are learning, because we think schools have worked incredibly hard to give teachers the skills to use the digital tools, get the children able to use them. And we've been monitoring the engagement. And, we can have engagement, but actually the purpose of school is to learn. So now it's supporting the leadership teams within school to really look at the quality of learning and where are they getting that evidence from, because it's not as easy to see where pupils are learning. You could walk through a school and get a feel for what was happening. That's not quite the same, dipping in and out of virtual lessons and all sorts of ways that we're working at the moment. So there is some support material that's currently being developed to really help our leaders in schools to start to question that, where is the learning taking place, and to help them to look at where the evidence for that is. So we've been in that kind of crisis response, getting children learning, and now the focus is very much on is the teaching and the tools that we're using really having an impact on the learning. So moving beyond the technology and trying to do the normal things that schools would have done. At this time of the year, schools would have been doing a lot of monitoring of the provision and the progress that children are making. And despite the pandemic, these children have one go at this, so we have to get it right for them. We get to practice multiple times, but they don't. So that is a focus of all of the work that we're doing this term.
Thank you for that. I fully agree.
Chair, if I'm just able to add to that, on the back of Clara's comment there, we realise the importance of expediting this work. So we're hoping that the materials are going to be with schools a week on Monday. They're going through a consultation process next week with our representative stakeholder group and our delegate heads group. And the intention is that they're with schools next Monday, and our improvement partners will be able to work alongside schools in how they can best monitor and implement the materials.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Does anyone else would like to ask or speak? Okay, great, thank you everyone. So the recommendations here is to note this report. So do we have a proposer and a seconder?
Yeah, I'll do that. Neil.
Okay.
And I'll second that. Yanon.
Okay, thank you both. And now we're on to our where are we? Agenda item 8, which is the Revenue and Capital Monitoring Report for the period 1st of April to 30th of November 2020.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
No problem.
So this is the Capital and Revenue Monitoring Report that you'll be familiar with, and this takes us up to the period to the 30th of November. Looking at the revenue position first, there's been a further reduction in the projected overspend from the past report due to some favourable variances. Most of these favourable variances relate to staffing underspends, and the overspend is now no longer an overspend, reported as a break-even position. I do want to flag an issue picked up in paragraph 2.2 of the report in respect of schools. It does state that, however, this year it is possible that total school deficit balances may exceed total school positive balances, and so school balances overall may fall into an overall deficit position. So I think we've got, at the time of writing the report, we had about 11 schools forecasting a deficit position. School balances at this point of the year can be understated though, so it's something that we'll need to keep an eye on as we progress through the rest of the year. We have claimed from Welsh Government as part of the hardship grant wherever possible, and will continue to do so. Centrally, the main source of overspend is around education transport, and there is quite a lot of commentary in the report about this. The majority of this relates to ALN transport, which is particularly complex and volatile, but there is also a significant overspend relating to the secondary area of transport. There are some planned transfers to reserves, and most notably a transfer from reserves to support 21st century school implementation costs, and also a transfer to reserves for the library service for the delayed implementation of the Open Plus system, which has been delayed due to COVID. There are savings detailed in paragraph 2.7, but these are on target to be achieved in 1920. Moving on to capital, we continue to progress well in terms of expenditure, which is shown in Appendix 2 of the report. I'd just like to draw your attention to two key areas that are set out in paragraphs 2.12 and 2.13 of the report. The childcare offer capital grant, small grant scheme COVID-19. So the council's been awarded an additional sum of 40,000 towards the capital small grant scheme. But that funding must be fully utilised by the 31st of March 2021. And that's been included via emergency powers. And in terms of the childcare offer capital grant, Education decided to commence with the original scheme for Landvire. The scheme has been out to tender and preferred contractor has been identified, but due to the delay on that decision and the size of the scheme, that isn't going to be able to achieve in the original development timescales. So it's now due to take place in the summer holidays 2021. And so it's been requested that 441,000 can be carried forward into the 21-22 capital programme. We now have 5 of the 21st century schools schemes on site. So that spend is progressing at a quite a significant rate now. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Gemma. Would anyone like to comment or add any questions? Hi there, Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw attention to, in terms of the capital budget, bearing in mind we are in a backdrop of a pandemic, the performance of our 21st century schools team and the property team in achieving this level of outcome, both for the new school builds and also the asset renewal funding, which included additional asset renewal funding, which we were able to access from Welsh Government, is absolutely phenomenal. And I would like to put on record via your committee, if that's possible, my huge thanks to them. We all know that quite often there are bits of slippage in capital programmes because the work tends to get done in school holidays. But if all we're looking at is a few schemes that are quite sizable schemes that are slipping through to the summer of this year, then that is a superb performance.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So again, for this item, the recommendations is to consider the position and note it. Would anyone like to propose?
Yeah, I'll propose again, but can we include as part of the recommendations the point that Liz Burnett just raised about thanking our 21st century schools people and so forth for the amazing work they've done under such difficult circumstances.
Yes, we can certainly add that in. Is everyone happy with that?
Second that, please. Rhiannon.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Birch. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gemma. And now we're on to agenda item 9, which is the third quarter scrutiny decision tracking. Over to you, Kath.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is the decision tracking report for quarter 3. It's obviously a quarterly report compiled by Democratic Services on behalf of this committee. It advises of progress made in relation to recommendations made by the committee and confirms the updated forward work programme for 2020 to 21. The covering report is fairly standard, as you'll have seen before, but I would draw your attention to section 2.3, where we just provide a brief explanation as to the lack of Q1 recommendations in the report, which is due to the cancellation of scrutiny committee meetings between March and July of 2020 last year due to the COVID pandemic. So this report only covers recommendations made in quarters 2 and 3. We have 4 appendices attached to the report. I'll just take you through them briefly. Appendix A is recommendations made in quarter 3. Appendix B is recommendations made in quarter 2. And we're just asking you to sort of have a look at those and sign them off, say that we can say that they've been completed and approved, because there aren't any ongoing yet, as far as I'm aware. Appendix C is actions that were ongoing for the previous municipal year. There's a couple of those that I will outline for you briefly. In terms of a recommendation made on the 19th of September 2019, it was to form a subgroup on the affordability of education. That subgroup was formed. It was the cost of schooling task and finish group. They did meet twice. Unfortunately, work did have to be postponed on that due to the pandemic, but it is set to restart in the new year. We have initiated contact with the member who was chairing that group, and there are discussions about when we can get a meeting date in place. So as any members of that group, we will be contacting you as soon as we can. I would also draw your attention to the fact that a section has been added at the end of the work programme for task and finish work. So it's just to make sure that we do keep it on our radar and we're not letting it slip. Mm-hmm. The other is an action that was set as a result of a recommendation on the 13th of February 2020 regarding including the scrutiny minutes in a report that was to go back to Cabinet. Due to delays because of the pandemic, that report hasn't gone to Cabinet yet. We will obviously update that as soon as the report has gone. And then Appendix D is the updated work programme schedule for 2020 to 21. I would just like to verbally convey an error that is in the report in the appendix. The Central South Consortium report that was due to come in February has obviously come to this meeting. So that'll be amended before the work programme is uploaded to the website, but I apologise for that error. But other than that, we're just asking you to take a look at the work programme. It is obviously the committee's document rather than Democratic Services. So we'd like to hear your views as to whether you're happy to approve it or if there are any changes. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Kath. I just missed the last bit, but I think you were just asking whether everyone is happy with what we have agreed. Does anyone have anything they would like to bring up that we may want to change, or we're all good?
Could I just clarify? Sorry, I've flipped my page over. I've got one more point to make, actually. And just with a little further detail with regards to the slippage of the youth engagement progression report that would have come this month. It's slipped to March just because officers will be in fuller possession of sort of more comprehensive data at that point. So they wanted to be able to bring a more meaningful report to committee, which is why it slipped to March. But otherwise, that's all from me. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Kath. So are we happy with that? Okay, no problem. Do we need to propose it, or are we just happy to?
Happy to accept it.
Accept. Fab. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we are on now to item 10. I have nothing to bring up which is urgent, and similar for item 11. So there we go. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, if I could come in there, it's Rhiannon. There were a couple of things I asked for verbal updates on. I don't know whether it's possible for those to be addressed. One was the provision of laptops to all children who, didn't have access to that equipment. Another was an update on what is going to happen with exams and external assessments. And the other one was whether or not any work is being undertaken on the long-term effects of lockdown on children's mental health.
Hi, Trevor.
Hi there. I can give a quick update on the laptops.
Thank you.
And where we're at. Yep. Right. So the background and detail around what we've done through the hub program, you folks will be aware of, which started in earnest in April around digital inclusion. So in terms of an update since then, we've been able to get out an additional 2,100 devices out into schools. And we've got another 1,500 devices which are due to be delivered in the next 2 weeks. So we procured about 4,000 over the summer, and that's what we've had to date. So there's a lot of devices that have gone into those schools and to support those families. In addition to that, we're starting to work with the folks in the public sector and other charities who have approached us and who have asked if there's any way that they can restage equipment and get that out to families who need them. So that work is underway at the moment as well. A number of weeks ago, we undertook another survey with our schools to see how they were progressing with supporting those digitally excluded families. And we've had a number of responses back. And what's interesting to note, I suppose, and it follows on from the presentation we had from the CSC, is the need of these pupils has evolved over the course of the pandemic, and how learning has been disseminated into homes has changed. So what we had seen previously was there was more sharing of devices in homes that might not have had any laptops, for example, and mobile broadband units. But as we've moved more and more towards live lessons, you can't concurrently have a number of pupils in the same household sharing a device. So that's a new pressure that's evolved through that progress with delivering learning. And what I would say is there isn't a national approach on that at the moment. So there is some differences in terms of how that's applied at a local level at schools. So we continue to support schools from that perspective. We also deployed about 250 MiFi devices, I think it was. So this is to give homes the ability to connect to the internet, as it were. What we have seen from that actually is, although those have been deployed, the uptake of that isn't as strong as we would have thought. So by that I mean, now that the devices are in homes, we can actually see how much data is transferring, and we aren't seeing a huge amount of data being transferred. So that tells us either families have found other ways around that, or it's an avenue for us to ensure that those families have the appropriate engagement with the schools, and that's being monitored quite closely. So that's where we are at the moment. As I say, we're expecting more devices to come in the next few weeks, and we continue to work really closely with those schools and those families to make sure not just that they have the technology now when we're in lockdown, but following on from the conversations we had earlier about how delivery and expectations and challenges in families are going to evolve going forward, that those families will have some technology to support them, when the day comes that we do get back into school, to deal with how learning has changed, I suppose. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you very much.
Morwen, before Councillor Thomas, were you going to?
No, Trevor answered my question. I was going to ask about multiple devices in homes with multiple children, but he covered that, so I put my hand down again.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Would you like me to come in now, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, so in response to Councillor Birch's query about exams and assessment, there's very little that we could update you with, really, because last week, following the announcement that schools would not be returning for face-to-face learning, at least until the end of January, Qualifications Wales, who is the regulatory body for exams and assessment, they then announced on Friday that the assessment window that they had planned from middle of February to the middle of April would no longer take place. So that has gone, but at the moment, they haven't given any indication as to what will happen instead. So they're having a series of meetings with directors, with head teachers and other groups. And at the moment, we do not know anything more than that. As soon as we do, obviously we will feed back to you, but we don't know any more than what's currently out in the media.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Shall I come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Birch, for that question. It's a really interesting area that's where research is developing all the time. There are a number of studies, I think all of which are coming to similar conclusions, that the impact of COVID and of lockdown and all the associated pressures that come with that are having a significant impact on mental health of young people, and that we're likely to experience the fallout of that for many years to come. I think, you know, there's lots of talk about the vaccine, and that could take things back to some form of normality, although obviously the jury's out on that, but hopefully that will be the case. But I think the legacy of this will be long lasting. So we will have, you know, we will have to be very mindful of mental health and well-being of children, young people going forward. And I think there's, you know, the reasons for the impact on mental health are multifaceted, really. So, you know, there's research which shows how the impact on families, sort of the economic pressure on families, has impacted on family life and the pressure at home, which obviously impacts on children. Lockdown has led to an increase in domestic violence, and obviously children and young people are caught up in that. So there are those factors, and then there are factors about young people not being in school as well. So the sense of isolation from their peers, the concerns about exams, and one of the key things that's come out of research is actually the unpredictability and the lack of certainty for young people, you know, so going in and out of lockdown and not sure about what exams they're going to take, you know, linking to your previous question, all that adds to uncertainty. So, yeah, it's not a particularly, healthy picture in that respect. We also know that the referrals to various agencies are going up. I was talking to colleagues in Children's Services this morning, and they were saying that the referral rate to them is 60% higher today than it was this time last year, which is, I think, a significant indicator of the impact that all this has had. So, does that help, Councillor Birch?
Well, certainly it's interesting. I don't know whether help is the operative word.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you as a magistrate that we are certainly seeing an increase in domestic violence. I mean, some of the cases that are coming to court are, you know, really very unpleasant, and the result of people being shut up for, you know, days at a time with alcohol, unfortunately. So no, I'd be very interested, and I think that that's something that we need to be tracking, is the long-term effects on children, because, you know, exam results are one thing, but mental health is something completely different, isn't it? And I've seen that, you know, within children in my own family. I have a niece who is, well, she upper sixth, so she's year 13, predicted really good grades, but has no idea what she's going to be doing, whether she's going to be going anywhere, and, you know, is looking for recognition of the work that she's done since she was 4 years old, which simply may not be forthcoming. So, no, thank you very much. And I will say I would be looking for regular updates on this. I mean, I know that it's something you'll be keeping track of anyway, so I'd be interested to know what's, you know, what the fallout is. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for everybody else to answer my questions as well.
Is there anything we need to do in that for regular reporting, or is there any? Was that?
Well, I know we've closed the agenda item down, but if members were minded to add reports to the forward work programme, if any heads of service would be happy to give us something, I could certainly add reports, but I'm not sure if that's something that anyone wants to do.
I would only be looking for verbal reports. I don't wish to put more pressure on people who've already got too much to do. I'm not looking for written reports, but verbal updates are fine with me as long as everyone else is happy with that.
Could Rhiannon give notification of times when she'd like those verbal reports in the future? So maybe in 3 months' time, you can say, "Well, can someone give me a verbal report on that?" Would that then cover it?
I'd be happy to do that.
That should be fine.
Okay, great. You do that. Thank you very much. Okay. Do we have anyone else? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Rhiannon. And thank you, everyone. And that's the end of it. And good night. Cheers, all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night. And Happy New Year.
Good night now. Thank you.
Happy New Year.